Padre Pio looked at the man across the confessional and went very still. He had heard the confession. He had listened to the full account, the impatience, the business decision that was less than entirely honest, the neglected prayer, the Sunday when the weather was fine and the fields were calling and Mass had been skipped. He had heard all of it. And then, before speaking the words of absolution, he looked at the man in a way that Brother Daniele Natale, who was present in the sacristy at some distance, later described as looking past the man rather than at him, looking at something in the man's soul that the man himself had no access to. Then Padre Pio said, "There is something you have not confessed." The man said he had told everything. Padre Pio said, "Your son, the boy who used to pray with you, he does not pray anymore. Do you know when that stopped?" The man did not know. He had noticed. Of course he had noticed. He was not an inattentive father, but he had attributed it to adolescence, to the natural pulling away of a boy becoming a man, to the ordinary faith that comes and goes. He had not examined it. He had not asked himself whether there was a cause he could trace. Padre Pio said, "It stopped the evening you called the rosary women's work." The man was silent. "You said it at the dinner table. Your son was 12 years old. He was at the age when a boy decides whether his faith will be his own or a remnant of his mother's. He was watching you. He was waiting to understand whether faith was something a serious man did or something a serious man had quietly outgrown. And in the moment you named it women's work, he decided. A sin worse than taking a life. Those are not my words. They are drawn from the teaching of the Church and from the specific expression Padre Pio used repeatedly in the confessional throughout his 50-year ministry when he encountered it. The sin he described as open-ended, the sin that does not stop when you stop committing it, the sin that continues to cost someone else long after the moment of its commission has passed from your memory entirely. The sin of scandal. Not scandal in the modern sense, not gossip, not embarrassment, not public disgrace. Scandal in the precise theological sense, the act of saying or doing something that leads another person away from God, that weakens their faith, diminishes their practice, gives them permission or example or motive to move further from the divine. The Catechism calls it grave. Jesus, in Matthew chapter 18, described it with a millstone. He said it would be better to drown with a millstone around your neck than to scandalize one of his little ones. Better to drown than to do what most Catholics do every week without a second thought. Let me tell you something most people don't realize. I spent many years in St. Osberg's parish in Coventry before I understood the specific weight of this teaching. And when I finally understood it, when I finally had language for what Padre Pio was describing, I sat very still for a long time because I recognized in the description not just the moments I had witnessed in other people's homes, but moments from my own history. Things I had said in certain company. The particular tone I had sometimes used about parish matters in the presence of people who were still deciding whether the faith meant anything to them. Words I had thought were honest and perhaps even witty, which had done precisely what Padre Pio described. There was a woman at our parish, I will call her Helen, though that is not her name, who had been attending Sunday Mass with a somewhat skeptical eye for years. She was not hostile to the faith. She was genuinely uncertain. She had married into a Catholic family and was trying honestly to understand whether what her husband believed was something she could also believe. And I had on 2 or 3 occasions in conversations after Mass said something about the homily or the choir or the particular way Father Declan had handled a difficult reading that was funny and precise and correct, and which signaled unmistakably that the correct relationship to all of this was one of affectionate irony. Helen had laughed each time. She had agreed. And she had absorbed from my example that the intelligent response to the Mass was the comfortable distance of observation rather than the uncomfortable exposure of genuine participation. She left the church 2 years later. She told me, years after that she had never quite been able to take it fully seriously. She did not connect this to our conversations. I connected it. Eventually. I had not known I was doing it. That is precisely the point. The sin of scandal is the most commonly committed serious sin that is almost never confessed. That sentence deserves a moment of stillness. Not the most commonly committed minor sin. The most commonly committed serious sin, the category that includes the gravely damaging, the category that the Church has always treated as requiring confession, and almost never confessed. Not because Catholics are dishonest in the confessional, because they genuinely do not see it. They have not been taught to see it as a specific, nameable thing that belongs in the confessional with the same specificity as any other serious sin. Not because Catholics are deliberately hiding it, but because the vast majority of Catholics who commit it do not recognize it as a sin at all. They recognize impatience when they commit impatience. They recognize dishonesty when they tell a lie. They recognize lust and pride and envy because these sins announce themselves in the moment of commission. They have the quality of something done, something chosen, something to be brought to the confessional with a beginning, a middle, and an end. Scandal does not announce itself. It moves silently through tone and implication and the accumulated weight of 1,000 small dismissals, and it does its damage in the soul of the person who received it, not in your soul, in theirs, and you may never know what it cost. You may go to your grave having forgotten the dinner table comment, the ironic remark, the casual eye roll during the homily, the story told with just enough humor to suggest that the Mass was primarily material for gentle observation rather than genuine encounter with God. You will have forgotten. The person who received it may not have. Padre Pio saw it in 3 people, whose stories I want to tell you today. 3 different people, 3 different expressions of exactly the same sin. And what he said to each of them changes the way you understand both the gravity of the sin and the specific mercy that is available for it. The first person was a man named Raffaele Abate. He was 48 years old, a wine merchant from the town of San Giovanni Rotondo itself, which meant that Padre Pio had known him by sight, if not by name, for years. He was a church-going man. He went to Mass on Sundays. He received communion regularly. He was, by the measures most Catholics use to assess their own standing, a reasonably observant Catholic. He was not a man who would have described himself as a danger to anyone's faith. He had also spent 22 years of marriage making cutting remarks about his wife's rosary, not maliciously, not with the intention of damaging her faith. Her faith was, as far as he was concerned, her business, and he had no quarrel with it. But Raffaele was a practical man who measured everything by its visible usefulness, and he had, over 2 decades of marriage, been unable to resist the occasional comment about the women who gathered on Tuesday evenings for the communal rosary, about the number of hours his wife spent on her knees in a given week, about the prayers that seemed to him long on repetition and short on tangible result. He called them women's prayers. He said it lightly, without heat. He said it in the way that a man says something he considers obviously true and mildly amusing. He said it at the dinner table in front of his 3 sons. His 3 sons, Augusto, 24, Lorenzo, 21, Carlo, 17. Padre Pio looked at Raffaele across the confessional and said, "2 of your sons do not go to Mass." Raffaele acknowledged this. He had hoped Padre Pio might offer some guidance on how to bring them back. Padre Pio said, "I'm going to tell you when it started, not when the faith died. Faith does not die suddenly. I'm going to tell you when you turned down the flame." He named the year. He named the specific comment, not the exact words, but the content and the context, the dinner table, the rosary, the phrase that reduced it to something a serious man had privately outgrown. He told Raffaele that his sons had been watching him with the particular watchfulness that sons apply to fathers, which is different from any other kind of observation. Sons watch fathers to learn what a man believes is worth taking seriously. And what Raffaele had communicated over 22 years of small dismissals was that the faith their mother practiced was something a man tolerated in the women of the house, but did not himself fully inhabit. "You did not tell them to stop going to Mass," Padre Pio said. "You would never have done that. You are not that kind of man. What you told them, in 22 years of dinner table comments, was that faith belonged in a particular category, the category of things women did and sensitive men humored. And when your sons became men, they moved it out of their lives the way men move things that belong in the category of what women do and sensitive men humor." Raffaele sat in silence for a long time. "The sin you came to confess today," Padre Pio said, "is ordinary. The sin you did not know to confess is the one that matters." Hold on. Because the second person Padre Pio confronted about this sin was not a man who had been dismissive of faith. She was a woman who loved the faith, who would have been genuinely horrified to learn what her love of storytelling had done. Her name was Silvana Costantini. 39 years old, a seamstress from Foggia, deeply devoted. She had a picture of Padre Pio in her kitchen. She attended Mass daily when her schedule allowed. She prayed the Angelus with real attention. She came to Padre Pio in 1956 with a concern about her business, a dispute with a supplier that was causing her genuine distress. Padre Pio let her describe the business matter for a few minutes, and then he said, "Tell me about the stories you tell at dinner." Silvana was confused. "What stories?" Padre Pio said, "The stories about Mass, about the parish, the priest who stumbles over the readings, the old women who pray too loudly, the smell of the candles, the way the deacon looks when he is trying to remember the right place in the book." Silvana recognized them immediately. She told them often. She did not tell them with contempt. She loved the church. She loved the Mass. She loved the community of the parish. She found the human particularity of it funny in an affectionate way. She had a gift for observation and for the precise retelling of small events, and her dinner table was frequently alive with the kind of laughter that comes from a well-told story about something familiar. Her daughter Paola, who was 17, had grown up listening to these stories and had found them, as Silvana found them, affectionate and true and amusing. Padre Pio said, "Your daughter stopped attending Mass 6 months ago. You have attributed this to adolescence. I want to tell you what I saw." He described what had happened in Paola's understanding of the Mass over 2 years of dinner table stories. Not a single decisive moment, a gradual shift. The accumulating impression that the Mass was primarily a context for observation, that the correct relationship to it involved a certain ironic distance, that the people who approached it with unguarded reverence were perhaps endearing, but were clearly not seeing the same thing that intelligent people saw. Paola was 17, and she was intelligent, and she wanted to be seen as intelligent, and the model of intelligent engagement with faith that she had absorbed at her mother's table involved the detachment that her mother brought to the telling of those stories. Silvana had not been mocking, she had been loving. She had been celebrating, in her own way, the very human texture of parish life. But the love had been expressed through a mode of observation that required distance, and the distance, absorbed over 2 years by a daughter who was learning how to be in the world, had become Paola's instinctive relationship to the faith itself. "You did not teach her to leave the Mass," Padre Pio said. "You taught her how to watch the Mass, and when the watching became more practiced than the participating became less necessary. This is what truly matters about the sin of scandal, and this is the part that most Catholics have never fully considered. It is the only sin Padre Pio consistently described as open-ended. Most serious sins have a defined cost. You committed them. The damage was done. The repair is specific and proportionate, and when the repair has been made, the account is closed. But the sin of scandal has no natural endpoint. It continues to operate in the soul of the person who received it, for as long as the damage it caused has not been healed. The original moment may be 20 years behind you. The faith you weakened in someone else may still be weakened. The door you slightly closed in someone's soul may still be slightly closed. And you have been going to confession for 20 years and not once mentioning it because it had left your memory entirely before you had any understanding that it was something to confess. Padre Pio described this quality of the sin once in a letter to his spiritual director, Father Benedetto Nardella, in a passage that Brother Daniele later transcribed into the friary record. The sin of scandal is like a fire that the one who lit it can no longer see, burning in a house down the street. The man who lit it has walked away. He has perhaps even forgotten the match. But the house is still burning, and God sees the fire and the man and the match and knows that they belong together, even when the man no longer does. He was not saying that God holds us responsible forever for effects we cannot undo. He was saying that the responsibility, once recognized, demands a specific response, not vague guilt, not a general improvement, the specific response of naming it, bringing it to God, and asking for grace to reach what we can no longer reach by ourselves. I've seen it with my own eyes, in the homes I visited as a health visitor and in my own life. The fires that were still burning down streets the person who lit them had long since walked away from. The children who had left the church and who, when I spoke with them carefully, could trace the moment not to a dramatic apostasy, but to a small, forgotten spark. A parent who had sighed during the homily one too many times. A teacher who had expressed patient contempt for religious thinking in a way that seemed to a 15-year-old like the definitive judgment of an intelligent adult on the matter. A friend who had made the faith seem embarrassing at an age when embarrassment was intolerable. The spark was small, the fire was real. This is not a reason for despair. I want to be extremely clear about this because what I am describing sounds heavier than I want it to. It is not heavy in the direction of hopelessness. It is heavy in the direction of taking seriously a thing that most of us have been treating as weightless. The third person Padre Pio confronted about this sin was a priest. His name was Don Crescenzo Palmieri. He was 56 years old, the parish priest of a village on the outskirts of the Foggia province, a man who had served the church faithfully for 30 years. He was educated, thoughtful, and had the particular quality that educated and thoughtful clergy sometimes develop, the habit of expressing measured uncertainty about difficult theological questions in the presence of his more sophisticated parishioners as a signal of intellectual honesty. He did not doubt the essentials of the faith. He was no heretic, but he had, over years of private conversation with the educated professionals of his parish, made occasional remarks that suggested a nuanced distance from certain devotional practices. The rosary, for certain personalities, had perhaps a limited spiritual vocabulary. The cult of saints might carry more popular superstition than it perhaps deserved. These were positions held by some serious theologians. He expressed them with the care of a man who was being honest, rather than the care of a man who was being a shepherd. Several of his parishioners had used those private expressions of doubt as permission, not as the reason. Permission. They had been looking quietly for an exit from practices that required effort, and their pastor's sophisticated distance had opened the door just enough for them to walk through it with a clear conscience. Padre Pio received Don Crescenzo not in the confessional, but in a brief encounter after a mass at San Giovanni Rotondo. He looked at the priest directly and said, without preamble, "You have given away something that was not yours to give." Don Crescenzo asked what he meant. Padre Pio said, "The faith of your people. It was given to you in trust, not to do with as you thought best, to guard and nourish and transmit. When you expressed doubt about the rosary to Signor Ferrante, you gave away something that belonged to Signor Ferrante's wife, who had built her spiritual life around the rosary and would not have wanted to inherit her husband's new uncertainty about it. When you suggested to the school teacher Andreotti that the saints might carry more superstition than substance, you gave away something that had kept Andreotti's sister close to the church through years of difficulty. You were not malicious. You were, I believe, genuinely trying to be honest, but a shepherd who is honest at the expense of the sheep has mistaken himself for a philosopher. Hold on, because what Padre Pio said next to each of these three people is the part that changes everything about how this sin is understood, and it leads directly to the specific mercy available for it. He said to each of them, in different words, but with the same content, the mouth that damaged is the mouth that repairs. This is what he called the principle of the specific instrument. In ordinary sin, the general repair is sufficient. Confession, absolution, a penance that addresses the type of sin. But in the sin of scandal, where the damage was done through a specific word or example directed toward a specific person, the repair requires the specific instrument, not a general prayer for the sins of the tongue, not a general improvement in behavior. The specific mouth that spoke the damaging word must speak the healing word. The specific person who received the damage must receive the repair. Padre Pio gave Raffaele precise instructions. Go to each of your sons who has left the Mass and say aloud in their presence, I owe you an apology. I told you in ways I was not even fully aware of that the faith your mother lived was something a serious man set aside. I was wrong. What she had was not a lesser thing. What she had was the real thing. I should have shown you the same. I am sorry. He was not told to preach to them, or to argue them back to the faith, or to make any demands. He was told to speak the specific words that reverse the specific damage, and then to let God work with what the reversal made available. He gave Silvana a different instruction. Stop telling the stories. Not because the stories were malicious, they were not, but because the love she had for the parish needed to find a mode of expression that pointed toward, rather than around. He said to her, the same precise eye that has been observing the human surface of the Mass can be turned toward its interior. Tell Paola what the Mass means to you when there are no stories to tell. Tell her what happens in you when the bell rings at the consecration. Give her your interior rather than your observation. The faith was always there inside you. You simply had not given it to her directly. He told Don Crescenzo to go to each of the people whose faith his sophistication had weakened and to speak, without the comfortable distance of intellectual nuance, the thing he actually believed, not the doubt, the faith, what he trusted, what held him. What had kept him a priest for 30 years through difficulties that the sophisticated detachment he showed his educated parishioners could never have survived. Give them the real thing, Padre Pio said. You have been giving them the performance of the real thing. That is not what a shepherd gives the sheep. And for all three of them, Padre Pio offered the same prayer of reparation. A specific prayer, said aloud, directed at God on behalf of the specific person whose faith had been weakened. The prayer goes like this: Lord, through my words and my example, I took something from someone who did not consent to give it. I did not know fully what I was doing, or I knew and did not think it mattered. I name it now before you. I ask you to restore to this person. And here you say the name, what my carelessness cost them, what my dismissal cost them, what my sophistication cost them. I give you the specific person and the specific damage, and I ask for a specific grace to reach them where they are now, in whatever distance from you my example helped create. And I ask for the grace to become someone whose words and example lead toward you rather than away from you. Amen. This prayer is not magic. It does not guarantee that the person whose faith was damaged will immediately return to the church. What it does is place the specific situation, the specific soul, the specific damage, the specific relationship, formally before God, naming what happened and asking for grace to reach what you cannot reach by your own effort. The prayer of reparation is not a formula that fixes what was broken. It is an act of formal acknowledgement before God, naming the person, naming the damage, naming your part in it, that opens the situation to divine grace in a way that your silence has been preventing. You have been, perhaps without knowing it, standing in the way of God's access to someone's faith simply by never having named your contribution to their distance from Him. The prayer removes you from the way. It says, I cannot repair this, you can. Here is everything I know about what needs repairing. I give it to you. Padre Pio said about this prayer, God can work in the space you open when you acknowledge specifically what you have done. A vague apology opens a small space. A specific acknowledgement named before God with the person's name and the specific act opens a larger space. And in spiritual matters, the size of the space you open for grace is not incidental. It is everything. I've seen it with my own eyes in 2 decades of health visiting in Coventry. In more than one home I visited, I could trace the adult children's departure from the church to a specific moment, a specific voice, a specific person who had been careless with something fragile. Not always a parent, sometimes a teacher, sometimes a priest, sometimes a friend at an impressionable age who had made the faith seem unsophisticated. The moment itself was often small. The consequences were not. And in almost every case, the person who had caused the damage had no idea they had caused it. They were not monsters. They were people who had been thoughtless with something that required care. Few Catholics know this about their own confessional history. They may be carrying, unconfessed, a sin that has been operating in someone else's soul for longer than they can remember. A sin that has caused real, ongoing damage to someone they love. A sin that is entirely addressable, with a specific prayer and a specific conversation and the specific grace that becomes available when you name a specific thing before God. But because no one taught them to see it, they have been carrying it without even knowing it is there. And on the other side of that silence, someone's faith remains slightly dimmer than it should be. And here is what I want you to take from this, because we are almost at the end of this video, and I want to be direct with you. Most of you have done this. I do not mean this as an accusation. I mean it as a statement of statistical probability. Every person who has practiced the faith for more than 20 years in the context of family and work and ordinary social life has at some point said something or failed to say something that moves someone else, however slightly, away from God. The question is not whether it has happened. The question is whether you know what it was and whether you have ever named it before God. If you have never confessed the sin of scandal specifically, not as a general failure in charity, but in the specific form described here, a word, a tone, an example, a story that weakened someone's faith, then you have something to bring to the confessional that you have never brought before. You have a name to say in prayer that you have never formally said in this context. And you have, available to you right now, a prayer of reparation that can open a space for grace to reach a person who may be carrying, without your knowledge, the weight of what you gave them in a careless moment. You just received something that Padre Pio spent 50 years of confessions trying to press into the awareness of Catholics who had been treating this sin as either non-existent or too vague to address. The specific gravity of causing spiritual damage in another soul, the specific mercy available for repairing it, and the specific prayer that places the person, the damage, and the grace all before God in one direct act. This channel exists to carry teachings like this one to the people who need them. The person who has never thought of themselves as a spiritual danger to anyone and who is exactly the person Padre Pio saw in confessional after confessional, carrying a sin they had never once connected to the word confession. If this reached you at the right moment, the super thanks button below is one way to say, keep bringing this. Keep finding the teachings that address the specific things. The vague guilt most Catholics carry around their whole lives is not what Padre Pio was interested in. He was interested in the named, specific, addressable thing. Help keep this channel doing exactly that. And now let me give you the prayer. Say it tonight. Not someday, tonight. Before you sleep, say it out loud, because Padre Pio always insisted that prayers of reparation be spoken aloud. The voice that caused the damage should be the instrument of the repair. Lord, through my words or my example, I weakened the faith of someone I love. I may not know exactly what I said or when I said it, but I name before you now every moment in which my carelessness, my dismissiveness, my sophistication or my silence gave permission to someone to move further from you. I name these people, and here you say every name that comes to mind. Family members, children, friends, co-workers, anyone who watched your life and may have learned something other than what you would have wanted them to learn. Lord, I ask you to reach each of these people, not through me necessarily. I understand that I may not be the instrument of the repair I caused the damage with. Reach them through whatever means you choose. Give back to them what my example removed. Restore the faith that my words diminished. And give me the grace, from this day forward, to be someone whose example leads toward you rather than away. If the name of a specific person came to mind as you listened to any of these three stories, Raffaele's sons, Silvana's daughter, the parishioners of Don Crescenzo, stay with that name. Say it in the prayer tonight. Say it again tomorrow morning. And if there is something practical to be done, a conversation to have, a specific word to speak, a story to stop telling, let the prayer give you the courage to do it. Padre Pio told Raffaele Abate after describing the damage 22 years of dinner table comments had done to his son's faith. The same mouth that built the wall can remove the stones, not all at once, not in a single conversation. But a man who begins to speak differently in front of his sons is teaching them something new with the same instrument that taught them something old. Begin tonight. Say one true thing about the faith in the presence of the same people who heard the untrue things. You may be surprised how much a man's sons are still watching him, even when they are grown. Raffaele went home. He sat with his son Lorenzo that evening after dinner. Not Augusto, not Carlo, just Lorenzo, the middle son, the one who had been closest to him. He did not make a speech. He said simply, I think I may have given you the wrong impression about some things, about the faith, about prayer. Your mother had something real, and I spent a long time being careless with how I talked about it in front of you. I am sorry for that. Lorenzo said nothing for a while. Then he said, I knew you didn't mean it the way it came out. A pause. I think I did let it change how I thought about things. I know, Raffaele said. That is why I am saying this. The following Sunday, Lorenzo went to Mass, not because his father had pressured him, not because he had been argued back into the faith, because a door that had been slightly closed for 12 years had been slightly opened by the same hand that had closed it. And once a door is open, even slightly, God does not need much space to work. Write reparation in the comments below if you are going to say this prayer tonight for someone specific. You do not need to tell us their name. Just write the word. Let it stand as your acknowledgement before this community and before God that you are taking seriously what Padre Pio spent 50 years trying to communicate, that the faith of another human being was placed, in part, in your hands, and that what you do with that trust matters in ways that continue long after the moment is past. Padre Pio said, "Every Catholic is either a door opening for someone or a door closing. There is no neutral position. What we say and how we live is always teaching someone something about whether God is worth approaching. Begin today to teach the right thing."